Today on The State of Us, the war in Ukraine is so devastating that 10 million have fled. The U.S. is set to regard Russia as a secondary threat despite the war in Ukraine. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, the friendly redneck liberal and senior historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. Today, we're looking at how the Ukraine war is complicating President Biden's military strategy on China and Russia, and how that could result in basically demoting Russia as a secondary threat rather than its primary status under the United States military protocol. So we're going to look at that and discuss it. We're also going to talk about how now 10 million have fled, either displaced inside the country or as refugees abroad from Ukraine as a result of the Russian invasion. But before we get started on both of those issues, let's turn to Lance for the word of the day.
Cursory, 3 syllables, cursory, as an adjective. Cursory means hastily, often superficially done, performed rapidly with little attention to detail. As an adverb, cursorily, and as a noun, cursoriness.
I mean, heard cursory, but didn't know that it had a noun version.
Hastily and superficially done.
Hopefully today is not a cursory conversation, right?
Well, it hasn't been, because we've been conversing for quite a long time before we went on air. So, but you'll wonder what President Biden and Mr. Putin are thinking and whether or not their decisions will be cursory.
As President Biden is set to travel to NATO soon to speak, right, to allies.
But is not going to go to Ukraine because it is a war zone.
Right. Isn't that the reason to go?
I'm just saying, just what the Wall Street Journal said.
Oh, okay. Well, let's just start off with that, Lance. Should President Biden visit Ukraine? You're President Biden. What do you do? Forget what President Biden should do. You're the president of the United States. The situation is what it is right now, right today. Are you going to Ukraine?
Yep.
Okay, me too.
I'd flaunt it. I'd say I dare you. I'd double dare you.
Putin would love that.
I would say it too. I would say I'd double dare you.
The first thing to turn to is this interesting thing that we picked up on that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, Lance, right? This article from the Wall Street Journal where Russia's invasion is forcing the administration to rethink its priorities, because the plan was, based on what was being drafted as our new sort of long-term strategic thinking in regards to all strategic adversaries around the world, right? That we had two, it was Russia and China, and that the plan under the draft that's been in the works since before the invasion was that Russia was going to be downgraded to a secondary adversary, basically, from a primary. And that would leave China as the only primary. So what does the article tell us about this, Lance?
What they're calling a 1+4 strategy. China first, and then places Russia among the lesser threats, which include North Korea, Iran, and other violent extremist groups. In the article, it says, from a Pentagon official, China remains, in our assessment, the only country that can systematically challenge the United States for now and for the rest of this century. That means diplomatically, technologically, economically, militarily, geopolitically. And Russia is not in that camp. They weren't a year ago, and they're not today.
And that comment is since the invasion of Ukraine, right?
That's exactly right. Yep. That's very recent. This has been an ongoing strategy that they've been developing since 2018. And according to the Pentagon official quoted here in the article, they say nothing has really changed. And I think the key here is the only country that can systematically challenge the United States in all of those different areas, diplomatically, technologically, economically, militarily, and geopolitically. I think what we have here is China's the only one who can really take us on. Can Putin be a pain in the butt? Can Putin be a regional problem? You know, like the leader of North Korea? That's the way we see them, okay? Is that true or not? I guess we'll discuss that a little bit later on in the show. But that's the realm of the U.S. government. And like I said, this policy was started to be developed during the Trump administration. So it's, this is not a presidential leaning. This is the Pentagon saying, we're working independently. This is what we see. We really don't care who the president is or who's in charge of Congress. When they ask us what our opinions are, this is our opinion. And, we know, hopefully we understand that the Pentagon works in that manner, that they don't necessarily work for the president when devising strategy until the president says, well, I want a strategy to do this. So this is just an overarching Pentagon strategy of how the United States should look at the world since 2018. And that is, China's it, folks, as far as who can really take us down. Now, can these other people cause us problems? Yeah, 9/11, Afghanistan, Iran trying to develop nuclear weapons. Yes, all of those things, North Korea, those are all things we have to keep our eye on. But according to this Pentagon statement, the only country that could systematically take us down at the current time is China. China's got not only the military, but the technology and the economic wherewithal that they could hurt the United States to a point where they might be able to then China become the dominant world power. I do not think Russia and North Korea or Iran have those capabilities at this time. I mean, and that's what the report is saying. And I agree with that.
Economics play a huge role, right? And Russia's like the world's 11th or 12th largest economy. So they're not even in the top 10. Obviously, the U.S. and China being first and second, respectively. So just from an economic standpoint, we don't really get a lot of stuff, right, in perspective from Russia. Now, are we seeing effects of this? Sure. However, could we go on without Russia existing? Yes. The United States could continue existence without drastic changes to the everyday lives of Americans. You wipe China off the face of the planet, that's a very different story, right? Because from an economic standpoint, we are very reliant, as the pandemic made clear to us in supply chain problems, on China in particular. So I think that's a very important component when we talk about this. However, when we shift our conversation to the military side, I think there's two primary ways to look at it. And this is what I shared with Lance prior to the show, right? The first way is to say all conventional military style, weaponry and all cyber capabilities, all that type of stuff. Is Russia a real threat to the United States? From a conventional military standpoint, not really. But granted, I think in fairness, there's really not anybody in the world who's a conventional military threat to the United States. Like, I don't think that most people understand, Lance, that the only true blue water Navy in the world is the United States Navy. I don't think most people really get that yeah, China's, this economic powerhouse, but I think they've not made it a secret that when they come for us, it's not going to be with troops and bombs and planes. It's going to be by repossessing us via our debt, and that's a way oversimplification. But the point is, they're going to come for us economically, right? They're going to come for us in that respect. They're not going to, not likely, they're not going to attempt to invade us with troops
or cyber attacks and ruining our economy or our infrastructure or, our power grid, those kinds of things. That's the way they're going to fight.
Exactly. And frankly, even if they overtake us as the world's first and largest economy, they still can't just wipe us off the map because they'd tank their own economy by doing that. China has invested heavily in U.S. government bonds. And if they destroy the U.S. government, that is bad for them. They want that money back at some point, or they at least want the benefits of us owing them the money, So it's an oversimplification to say that China could just wipe the U.S. out and be fine. We are codependent in many respects. When you look at the equation, I think between Russia and us, right, that scenario is vastly different, right? Vastly different. We do not need Russia the same way that we need China, right? And therefore, Russia is not the same type of threat that China is. Because if China wanted to cut us off tomorrow, as much as it would damage them, it would exact a serious toll on us, right?
Most definitely.
I mean, we would have major problems. If Russia does that, which we've actually done to Russia pretty heavily, as we can all tell, we can get by. Now, are there effects to that? Oil prices, that kind of stuff? Sure, of course there are. So I guess the other way to look at it is, and that's what we need to talk about next, right? We said conventional military. What happens if you take nuclear weapons into account? Because obviously the world has agreed since, I mean, for the most part anyway, since the United States was the only power to use nuclear weapons against, civilian and military-based targets, has agreed since that time that, using them again is not acceptable, right? Having them is one thing, but using them is not something that we're going to do.
And that makes total sense, right?
Right. Yeah, we're just going to have them.
I follow that logic.
We're not going to use them, but we just want to keep them. We just need to have them.
As a child growing up, I never did understand that. Now as an old man, I don't understand that we can't use them, but we're all going to have them. And we're going to have an arms race. We're going to have 10,000 nuclear warheads, and you only have 8,000. So therefore we're stronger than you, even though both of us have agreed that we're not ever going to use them. And I'm thinking, well, if you both can blow up the world more than once, why do you need all these extra? Because once the world's gone, and that's the way I grew up, right? That's what I was taught. That's what I was taught in school. These missiles, these warheads are so strong that the world's going to be blown up. Everybody's going to be killed. Nuclear winter, the fallout, the radiation, all this stuff. And, Russia has enough to do the world 6 times, and the United States has enough to do the world 10 times. And so that's why the United States is a superpower, because we can blow up the world more times than right. And I'm sitting there in my seat as a 4th grader and scratching my head like I am now saying, well, that doesn't make much sense to me. And I know I'm only 10 years old, but if you can destroy something, isn't it destroyed and isn't it gone? Why do you need to destroy it again? Because it's not going to be in existence.
So we're going to look at that coming up. How does it change, answering this question about should we really be moving Russia into that secondary category? How does it change if we take nuclear weapons into account? To find out, keep it here on the State of Us, and we'll be right back. According to the January report from Arms Control, the 2021 estimated global nuclear warhead inventories are as follows. The world possesses a combined stockpile of 13,080 nuclear warheads. More than 90% of those belong to Russia and the United States. Approximately 9,600 warheads are in military service, with the rest awaiting dismantlement. So, now, the important caveat here, right? These are the ones that, 2 things that we know about publicly, right? And that are reported by governments. Some nations are obviously going to have a harder time evading detection of their nuclear weapons than others. Most notably, the United States, Russia, and China probably have the highest degree of capacity of hiding, their official counts from the global stage. But obviously the United States would also have an interest, right, Lance, in hiding the number that the United Kingdom and France possess as well, where Russia may have an interest in Pakistan, India, North Korea, China. There are different people that might have an interest in obscuring that. But based on what we know, right, Russia and the United States alone control 90% of that. And that's Russia with about 6,200 current warheads, and the United States with 5,500. Now, the one thing that I think is important, because if you caught that, everybody would be like, wait a minute, did you just say that Russia has more warheads than the United States? Yes, that is what I said. I again, there were all those caveats that we talked about before. So those numbers may be different. Russia probably has more than that. The United States has more than that. Russia may very well have more warheads than us. But the other thing that is also important to take into account is, as Lance had mentioned before, you get to a certain number and it really doesn't, I mean, once you go over a certain number, right, it's kind of irrelevant, because whether you can blow up the world once, twice, 50 times, does that really, I guess, what good does that do, right? I mean, who cares? And the other thing to take into account is this is just the number of warheads, right? Like you might say, you look at this map, and by the way, you're welcome to pull it up. It's armscontrol.org. You would see by looking at the map that it says that North Korea has 40 to 50, nuclear warheads, and the United States has 5,500. Does that mean that those 40 to 50 that North Korea has are as good as any one of our 5,500? No, that's not what it means, right? Because, and this is the thing to take into account, North Korea, to our knowledge, right, possesses probably basic atomic weaponry. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, to put it in perspective, right, just to be clear, in the United States current nuclear arsenal, the most powerful bomb is the B-83, which has a maximum yield of 1.2 megatons, making it 60 times more powerful than the bomb that the United States dropped on Nagasaki, Japan in 1945. So where what North Korea has may be more comparable to an atom bomb, what the United States has is more comparable to a hydrogen bomb, right? Which are really, I mean, yes, technically in the category of nuclear weapons, but our best bomb is probably 60 times as powerful as what North Korea has.
Which means it's 60 times more destructive.
So I guess the reason I bring it up, Lance, is I think putting in perspective when we say nuclear powers around the world, the type of nuclear weapons they have is very relevant. The other thing is strategic nuclear weapons versus non-strategic. And what does that mean? Well, basically, it's just a classification that means the United States has a certain number of strategic warheads that we could basically launch from the United States and hit any number of key targets around the world, right? That's what that means. Then we have non-strategic warheads, which are ones that are not on that type of long-range deployment. So they have to be launched far closer to a target than that. They can't be launched out of an ICBM silo and reach, Moscow or Beijing or, North Korea. That's what that means. And that's the same thing with China and Russia. So that's where we left off at the end of the last segment, Lance, is what happens when you take Russia's nuclear arsenal into effect, given where they're at in the world, given who's leading the country. Do you still put them as a secondary adversary?
I know we're doing radio. I'm just throwing my hands up. It's like, I think the last two episodes, right, that we've done on this war in the Ukraine, I've said, take Putin out. I think my answer still goes. Whether they're a danger or not, Putin is a danger because he has this ability to do this. And you wonder what's going to happen when he's backed into a corner at some point and doesn't get his way. How will he respond? And he has this ability. Okay, I'm not saying he'll do it, but if anybody would, he would, because we talked last week about how within the history of the Russian people, you go to war and tell them how great it is, and then you lose face, you lose shame. They talk badly about you in history and forever, and Putin knows that. So if it gets to the point where Putin's going to lose, because I grew up in that time when Putin was going to lose, all bets are off at what he might use and what he might do. And I grew up when, like you said, we're going to build all these missiles and nobody's going to use them. Well, what was that called? It was called stupidity, but it was called mutual assured destruction, MAD. Okay. That it doesn't do me any good to fire mine, because if I fire mine, you're going to fire yours and we're going to kill each other. And then there's nothing for any of us to have power over, and it's all about power anyway. Okay. But you back somebody into the corner and they know they're going out of power anyway. What do they have to lose to use these things?
Building off of that's the New York Times article that we have today, right? Because it's easy to, when we think of nukes, right? I think the thing that comes to mind for a lot of us are these ultra destructive weapons that are really, really scary, right? And all nuclear weapons, I think, should be scary. I mean, I don't mean to minimize that in any way, but we're talking about, at the height, the largest test blast that the United States ever conducted was 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima, and Moscow's was 3,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima's. So when we talk about something that's only 60 times more powerful, it's like, well, yeah, that's smaller. Not that Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
I was going to say, have you ever seen the pictures of
what happened?
The destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And then you tell me, well, it's only 60 times more powerful, not 1,000 times more powerful. It's powerful enough. I don't care. The destruction done at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was just immeasurable. Not to mention, okay, we're not even getting into, that was the immediate effect. Not to mention the birth defects and the cancer rates and everything else that have gone on in that region since then. So it's not just dropping a bomb and the bombing of Dresden in Germany during World War II, where we just totally annihilated the city and everything else with bombs. And, even the fire bombs that were dropped on Tokyo with Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the mix did lots of destruction. But the nuclear attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki continued to cause problems decades after the bomb was dropped.
It's the fallout. Part of what's so destructive is the ongoing damage that's done when you use a weapon like this. But the point in bringing this up is to talk about that today, both Russia and the United States now have nuclear arms that are much less destructive. Their power just fractions of what Hiroshima's bomb's force was. Now, obviously, we still have the big boys, but the point is that Russia has small, quote unquote, small, right? Because again, nuclear weapons here, small nuclear weapons, smaller than what was used on Hiroshima. And why does that matter? Well, according to Lieutenant General Scott D. Breyer, director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he, when addressing the House Armed Services Committee last Thursday, said that Washington expects more atomic moves from Mr. Putin in the days ahead. Moscow is likely to, quote, increasingly rely on its nuclear deterrent to signal the West and project strength, end quote, as the war and its consequences weaken Russia. And the point is, as the article goes to explain, there are now entertaining the possibility that Putin may look to, as a way to, get Ukraine to submit, use maybe a small nuclear weapon on a relatively uninhabited area to signal the willingness to use it. In other words, the death, destruction, it's going to be about the shock and awe factor, right? Oh my God, he was willing to use a nuclear weapon, right? And the hope that that causes Ukraine to submit and say, as much as we want our independence, getting a nuke dropped on our heads, obviously that's not worth it. Now, whether or not any of that's actually going to happen, the point of the article is to say, with the type of nukes that are now available, that Russia and the United States possess, something like that is certainly plausible, right? Could certainly happen. Where you're not wiping out all of Ukraine and you're not destroying a major population center, but you are signaling, hey, don't forget, I do have these, and my ordering people to ready alert was not just a exercise, and so that becomes, I think, the step of talking about, do you really treat Russia as a secondary adversary?
Well, my only question is the rest of the world going to sit by and let him do that?
I think that's a great question. Lance and I are on the record as saying that we ought to be doing a hell of a lot more than we're doing right now in Ukraine, right? That has been, I think you can go back, Lance, and see that, I won't speak for you, but I think I had been saying that, as early as at least last fall, and maybe earlier than that. And obviously you and I were both saying that before the invasion of Ukraine and have continued to say it after the invasion of Ukraine. So that's beyond question that we've had that opinion. But the question that we have to entertain, that we'll endeavor to answer next, is if they do that, is that going to change where the world's currently at? Because obviously the world is not listening to what Lance and I have said.
I don't know how much more I have to say when I say we have to take Putin out of power. What more do you want me to say?
So we'll talk about it. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Our listeners heard last week in no uncertain terms how Lance and I felt about the situation. And if you haven't heard that, we strongly recommend you go back and listen to it. I think it was, I'd like to think that all the shows we do, Lance, are well done, right? I think that one is of particular importance. And not in that, Lance and I did such a great job. What I mean is that I think hearing that's very important, because I think we were fairly candid with our audience. And by no means cursory in our assessment of the situation and what we intend or what we think should be done. However, what we want to turn our attention to, where we left off at the end of the last segment, right, is if Putin decides to use a small, again, air quotes here, a smaller nuclear bomb in an mostly uninhabited zone of Ukraine as a signal, as is the potential outlined in this New York Times piece, do you think, obviously that would affect, you and I have said already what we would be doing. Do you think that really might affect President Biden, the United States Congress, NATO allies? Do you think that's going to affect any of their strategy on this?
Well,
really?
I'll refer to the first article about the Pentagon and their policy, that we have begun to build up our presence in Europe. The United States has already rushed more than 15,000 troops to Europe amid what the Wall Street Journal refers to as the crisis in the Ukraine. I think it's a war, but okay. Raising American forces levels in Europe to more than 100,000 personnel for the first time in decades. NATO members have also deployed reinforcements to the Baltics, Poland, Hungary, and Romania, which used to be what we referred to in the old days as Eastern Europe or the Soviet bloc. So we have more personnel over there, according to the Wall Street Journal, than we have had in decades. And Putin fires a small, air quotes, nuclear weapon. I would hope it would get them to reevaluate the situation and what's going on. Best I can give you. I'm not in their minds, okay? Now, I do understand, okay? I was a young flower child of the 60s and early 70s, okay? So I understand how we don't want war and we don't want people killed and we don't want, but I've also watched and understand that there are some people that are just inherently bad and you can't work with them. Adolf Hitler was one. I know what my opinion is about Vladimir Putin. What's the opinion of the rest of the world towards Vladimir Putin? We've tried to work with this person. This is where we've gotten. When is enough going to be enough? I don't know. After one, when he shoots it into a hospital, when he shoots one into a school or a theater where people are part of the fleeing group that trying to avoid war, and he decides to shoot a small nuclear weapon where they are holding up and trying to survive the war that's going on. At what point is the world, the United States and the rest of the world, going to get in and say, you know what, Mr. Putin, you did enough. You did too much. You overstepped your bounds. I don't know what it's going to take for the rest of the world. I know where I am. I'd like to hear where our listeners are. Email us at podcast@thestateofus.org and let us know where you are. I do understand. Okay. I was a history teacher. I've studied, I've looked, I've seen all the horrible things that war can cause. But I also know that the longer you let it go on, in my opinion, the worse the damage will be and the destruction will be.
Which is why I think you and I have said it's been time to do more for a while. It was time to do more before it all started. It's time to do more now.
So you don't get to that point that you described.
Exactly. My concern is obviously our leaders have not. I don't know. Maybe they've heard us a little bit, Lance, in that, right? We read some articles today about we're sending more air defense systems to Ukraine. We're sending obviously more aid. So we're doing more. We're not doing really any of the things that Lance and I have said that we think we ought to be doing, but we are doing more. The fear is that I feel like, Lance, as an American citizen, that I should definitively know an immediate answer to if Russia uses a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, right? Whether it's a little itty bitty or whether it's a big nuclear weapon, I feel like I shouldn't need to be skeptical about what the United States response to that would be. But I am. I don't know. I really don't know. And I wish that I did. I mean, I wish that I felt like I knew what the president would do. I knew what Congress would do, but I do not. I do not have any level of confidence in we would do something, we would do nothing, and if we did something, what it would be exactly.
From the New York Times article, Washington expects more atomic moves from Mr. Putin in the days ahead. So we're expecting him to do it. And so, like you said, we're not privy. Maybe we're doing something on the sly about this. But according to the article, we expect Washington, all right, Congress, President, expect Putin to make more atomic moves. And James Clapper Jr., a retired Air Force general who served as President Barack Obama's Director of National Intelligence, said Moscow has lowered its bar for atomic use after the Cold War when the Russian army fell into disarray. Quote, they didn't care, Mr. Clapper said, of Russian troops risking a radiation release earlier this month when they attacked the Zaporizhia, sorry about that, folks, if I really screwed that up, nuclear reactor site, the largest not only in Ukraine, but Europe. They went ahead and fired on it. That's indicative of the Russian laissez-faire attitude. They don't make the distinctions that we do on nuclear weapons.
And they also, for people that haven't heard or didn't know, Chernobyl is still under Russian troop occupation at the moment. And they kept for over 50 12-hour shifts the same people trapped at the facility to monitor it, right? The Ukrainians who are responsible for making sure that something doesn't happen. And that's not we're military, we're going to take these hostages. It's like, do you guys understand that if these people, get weary and are sleep deprived, that you're you're risking yourselves, right? Not just them, but it's bad for you. And that is, by the way, in recent news, the Russian forces in Chernobyl finally agreed to allow 64 of the staff that were in the greatest condition of distress to be relieved by another shift of volunteers who said, hey, look, it's bad for us, right? I mean, we're going in here, willingly going into a place that Russia is controlling because we understand that this has to be monitored.
We have to take care of this.
Yeah, we can't. It's a world and Russia and Ukraine and Europe preservation thing, right? You don't want to let. But Russia didn't care initially.
To the former Air Force general, Russia doesn't care. The world cares, but Russia doesn't care. Russia didn't care. If something happened, oh well, because they sent their troops in and that's what they did. Okay. So, and they knew something could have gone wrong, but it didn't placate them at all. They not a big deal.
So I think that's important, right? Because I mean, the mindset that's required to allow your troops to fire bullets toward a nuclear reactor is mind-boggling.
Or rocket launches or grenades or, it's a cursory attitude towards the whole thing. Like, we don't care what happens.
Right.
So what? We die, you die. So what? Yep. Doesn't that tell you what Mr. Putin thinks?
You have nuclear.
I'm not saying the Russian people, but Mr. Putin, what he's thinking?
You have nuclear scientists being forced to sleep on the floor, right? And work for literally days straight. And we're not talking about, you get a break. It's like, no, there is nobody else to relieve you. You're the only person that can do it. And we're going to force you to sleep here on the floor and barely feed you and not give you your medicine. And again, it's pretty much equally as bad as firing toward a nuclear, reactor of some kind. It's equally risky in that you're just no regard for the danger. And these are, mind you, not to minimize, the power of nuclear reactors, but that is nothing like, the devastation that would be caused as a result of something bad happening there. Russia using a nuclear weapon, right? I mean, these are laissez-faire attitudes toward minor nuclear things. So how are they going to respond to serious nuclear things? Which all goes back to what Lance and I have said many times of we are not doing nearly enough. So hopefully people will listen, Lance, to last week's show. And hopefully our leaders, something comes of, the NATO meeting. Not optimistic, sadly. Not optimistic that anything's going to come of that. And for those that are upset with President Biden, you can be upset with him. I am kind of on this, not kind of, I am, but I'm also upset with the United States Congress because it's not just the president of the United States. We all forget that. We've been trained to believe that it's really only the president who gets to decide these things, but Congress has the authority to basically tell Biden that here's what we're going to do. And they're not choosing to do that either, mind you. Okay. So don't allow Democrats and Republicans to abdicate their responsibility in Congress by, insinuating that, it's all really up to the president. There's not much we can do. No. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, we had it because True Chat has a mission, and the mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that again today, I think. And you listeners need to let us know, and you need to share what you've learned and what you think about it with your friends and others. And if they want to listen to it themselves and say, I like to follow that show, you can tell them they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found. And I think as far as cursory, I think we're going to have to go by the way of Major League Baseball this season and put a runner on second base because I think we're going into extra innings because the show ended in a tie.
So we'll have to carry over and see what takes place. The State of Us can be heard Tuesdays and Thursday mornings as a podcast. And we're, of course, also heard on AM and FM radios across the country on the weekends. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.